Hello and welcome. I'm Kenzie.
And I'm Carli, and this is Ask a Therapist.
Each week, we explore life's most relatable questions, from relationships and boundaries to burnout and self-worth, all through a therapist's lens.
We're licensed therapists, but this isn't therapy. It's a place for insight, reflection, and a little humor along the way.
Your questions,
our insights.
Ask a Therapist. This podcast is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. The content shared should not be considered a substitute for professional mental health care, diagnosis, or treatment. We strongly encourage listeners to seek help from a licensed mental health professional for any personal or psychological concerns.
Any advice or commentary offered is based solely on the information provided. As such, we cannot guarantee any specific outcomes, and the feedback given should not be interpreted as professional mental health advice. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, please call 911, 988, or 211.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're excited to start it off today. I'm going to start with another icebreaker question. So, Carli, what is your favorite season? And what is your ideal day in that season?
That's a good one because my favorite season has changed over time. So it used to be spring because my birthday is in March. So my birthday tends to mark like the beginning of spring. And by that time, truthfully, I'm tired of winter. I'm just ready, for like some warm weather.
Yeah.
But spring comes with allergies and rain, and like there are definitely some other sides of that. And sometimes spring comes late. I am turning into very much a fall girly. Like I am starting to love fall. And I think, honestly, I always associated it with like going back to school and routines, which I maybe like rejected a little bit. But now at my big age, I'm like, yes to routine, yes to the kids going back to school, like yes to all of that. So yeah, I'm really loving fall. And my ideal day definitely starts with getting outside and having like some sunshine. If I can go for a walk solo with my husband, like getting outdoors is always great. I like slow mornings. I prefer not to start taking appointments until like 10 if I can.
Sure.
Because I like a nice slow morning, a little maybe workout, something of that effect. Mm-hmm. I definitely need my coffee. And then I'm ready to tackle the day. And I like to kind of handle my work first. And then my second job as a mom and wife comes in, in the evenings.
Oh, I love that.
What about you?
I have always been a fall girl. There's just something about that, like crisp in the air and the leaves changing and just kind of, it just feels like such a cozy season to me. And so I think that my ideal fall day definitely involves like a walk and like seeing the leaves, being kind of just outside, that fresh air, sunshine. And then I love like, oh my gosh, give me a blanket, a big sweatshirt, football on in the background, some chili, like maybe read a little book, have a candle lit. Like that is fall to me. And so that is my that is my ideal for sure.
I'm mad that I talked about work in my ideal day. Like, it's definitely not though. So I don't even know where that came from. But when you were like football and cozy, I'm like, yes to that. Absolutely.
Because when you were talking about like what you would do on a work day, I was like, shoot, I'm going to go weekend here. I'm going to go ideal Sunday.
Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure.
Yes,
absolutely. Well, we've got another great question today. And this one comes from a 32-year-old. I don't believe they gave their gender, so I'm not sure. But this is about starting therapy and how to find the right therapist for you, which I think is a very common thing.
Love it.
In starting therapy.
Yeah.
So their question, how do I know if a therapist isn't for me? I had a hard time with my first ever therapist, and I struggled to know if it was me or her. I'd love for you to talk about whether that is normal and the best way to approach it. Kenzie, what do you think?
I love this question. It's such an important question, I think, for so many reasons, but one of them being that this is just so rarely talked about. And so, if you have this experience, it just feels so jarring. And I think especially in therapy, right? Like if you go to a doctor's office and you're like, this isn't really my person. It's like, whatever, I'm here for half an hour in, out, get my physical done, and that's that. It just doesn't really matter. But when you go to therapy, there is such a hope and vulnerability and expectation around it that if you have this kind of experience, it just feels really defeating, I think, to just kind of feel like, oh man, I had gotten myself there. I was so ready. I was so excited or hopeful or feeling just the anticipation of it. And now I'm leaving feeling maybe worse than I walked in. And especially if that was your first ever therapy experience, you're like, what is this how it's supposed to feel? Like that was weird.
No, 100%. I think about the amount of courage that it takes to
Yep.
go to therapy, right? And so
Yeah.
then you get there and to not necessarily connect with the therapist or, this person didn't even give examples, but I don't know if it was like a not feeling heard thing. I don't know if it was feeling judged or maybe your personalities just didn't seem to like mesh well. And that can be so disappointing and such like a
Mhm.
deflating experience when you finally decide I'm going to go and work on this. And sometimes people make it to therapy out of desperation. It's kind of like,
Yep.
I need help with this. And
Yeah.
so to not connect with that first therapist, I just have a lot of empathy for what that must be like. And of
Yeah.
course, I want to encourage people to like hang in there. But what do you
Sure.
think in terms of like, how do you actually figure out? Is it a not good fit thing, or is it just something I'm doing wrong, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think something that we should probably talk about first is the therapeutic relationship. Like the
Okay.
therapeutic relationship is the biggest indicator for success in therapy. And so having a therapist that you feel comfortable with, that you feel like I can trust, I can open up to, this is feels right is so important. And it really just can't be overstated enough. Like if you don't feel like this is the right fit for you, sometimes that can be reason enough to just kind of say, you know what, I think that I'm looking for something different. So I think just trusting that first initial gut instinct of it is important
Mhm.
and kind of looking at it as like a relationship that you're getting into. Like you're going in, you're kind of getting a feel, you're assessing it, but paying attention to when you leave from that first session or from those first few sessions, how are you feeling? Are you feeling like, I just feel like they didn't really get it. I just feel like maybe their style isn't for me. Maybe they weren't giving me any feedback and I really want a little bit more, or maybe they were giving me too much and I feel like I didn't have room to process through what I wanted to. Or maybe you're feeling like you're dreading sessions and not because therapy is hard, because sometimes it can be, but
Mhm.
because you just feel like that relationship feels off. I think that those are kind of maybe some things to pay attention to.
Definitely agreed. I agree that there's like a relationship building aspect. And so one of my first thoughts is don't give up too quickly. So I'm hearing you on the like your initial gut reaction that is worth something that matters. But also like therapy can be hard and kind of like it's awkward. Like you don't know this person, right? And
Yeah.
usually those first like 2 to 4 sessions, there's a
Yes.
lot of assessments and questions that are being asked and, going over the terms of therapy and exceptions to confidentiality and like the rules
Yeah.
and boundaries are being set. And if you say something that indicates that maybe there's some risk there, then there are certain things that we're required to do as therapists. And so
Yeah.
it can feel a bit clinical in the beginning. It can
Yeah.
feel a bit like an interrogation and hopefully your therapist has like enough awareness to try and make that process somewhat smooth.
Sure.
But there are certain like checkpoints that oftentimes we have to hit. And if you're coming to therapy and you're like, I'm ready to just like dump it all out and lay it there, and you don't necessarily get that opportunity,
Yeah.
then you can really feel like, okay, this is not what I signed up for.
Yeah.
I strongly recommend giving it 4 to 6 sessions before
Yep.
you make a judgment. That's just like a roundabout. Now, of course, like anything, there are
Yeah.
exceptions there, right? If a
Yeah.
therapist is like outright invalidating of your experience or disrespectful or like using offensive language, like hopefully none of this is happening, but like Of course, there are some exceptions, but I say try to stick with it from 4 to 6 weeks because at the
Yeah,
very least, hopefully you can gain some direction on what you would prefer. So even if
sure.
you know this person is not a good fit, you might have a better idea of what you're looking for rather than just kind of shooting in the dark again. Does that make
Yeah, yeah.
sense?
100%. I think
Yeah.
that, and this is maybe something that's helpful for listeners here, because this is something that you and I both, I would assume, I don't know if you do this, but I'm assuming that you do this. But when I have that first initial phone call, what I tell clients is just so you know, that first session is going to be a lot of background information, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
over and give them kind of a rundown of like, here's what to expect. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you about the confidentiality. I'm going to give you kind of those admin tasks. And then I'm going to ask you a lot of background information, a lot of questions about yourself so that I kind of get to know you. And then I tell people the first 6 sessions are really going to be that kind of assessment period. This is the time of kind of getting to know you, getting to know your story, painting that full picture so that people kind of know what to expect for those first couple of sessions. So just like you're saying, those beginning sessions are really that relationship building kind of process. And so you're really not going to feel super comfortable before that period. But there are going to be times where you're going to leave kind of a session, just like you do in if you're hanging out with someone. Like sometimes you might just leave and you might be like, I just kind of know, I just kind of have a feel of this person that, it just might not be the right fit. And so yes, give it some time if you feel like, well, maybe you can get there, but also knowing that kind of just your gut plays a role in this too. And so I think noticing that as well.
Agreed. Agreed for sure. I mean, therapists are still human beings. You know, we're
Yeah.
we're flawed and sometimes we think that we're connecting and we're on the same page. I can't tell you the number of times that I've walked away from a session and later learned that I had a different experience than what the client had. And this
Yeah.
is on both ends. Like sometimes I
Yeah.
might think it went really well and then been surprised by they dropped off or they,
Yeah.
canceled the next few sessions or vice versa, where I'm like, that went terribly and they're probably never coming back. And they're like, no, this was great. So just we can sometimes have a different impression.
Yeah.
But one thing that I would suggest is before you like leave and choose to just terminate, talk to the therapist about it.
Yeah.
So, like, this is something that as therapists, we're trained in this concept of we need to be able to take feedback. It is a critical
Mhm.
part of doing
Mhm.
our work well. So,
Yeah.
if you have had those few sessions and you're still not feeling quite connected, or you don't really feel understood, or any of the reasons that you mentioned, Kenzie, like maybe you don't feel like they're listening enough, or
Sure.
maybe they're just only listening and not giving anything back, and you're like, I would really like a little bit of feedback.
Huh?
Talk to them about it because I think the
Yes.
way that the therapist responds to your
Yeah.
feedback can really be, at least in my opinion, a difference maker between whether this is workable or
Yeah.
not, right? So see how they respond to you saying like, I was really hopeful that this would work out, but I'm feeling kind of hesitant or I'm feeling like maybe we've
Right.
hit a plateau and this isn't going to go very far. I think if you can have that conversation and work through it, the
Yeah.
relationship might actually grow significantly from that point.
Sure.
But, if they reject that feedback or aren't open to it, then it
Yeah.
probably is time to find someone else.
Think that something that is important to recognize and realize too is if nowhere else in the world you should be able to feel like you can talk about what you're feeling and what you're experiencing in therapy. That is our job. We are trained in being able to take that, to hold that, to have conversations around that. This experience isn't about us. This experience is about you and what you're getting from it. And so the client should feel like this is working for me. This is what I need. I'm getting what I want from it. I'm getting what I need from it. And yeah, we're human. We are people. And so we're not going to be the right fit for everybody. Not everybody's going to be the right fit for us. That's okay. That's why, we have people that we can refer to or we have some other resources if that ends up being the case. But we also know that it's not about us. We need to make sure that we're conducting the sessions in a way that really meets the client's needs. And part of that is advocating for yourself and sharing what you need and what you want.
Really.
So let's say that a client gets through, those first 4 to 6 sessions and they're still kind of feeling like, I don't think that this is the right fit for me. Maybe they tried to have a conversation around it. And or maybe it just really feels like I just don't know that this is going to work. I don't know this is what I need or what I want. What would you recommend that somebody do?
Yeah, I think that it is okay to like shop around a bit and
Yeah.
to potentially look for someone who maybe has expertise in what it is that you're needing. Hopefully, even if you didn't connect with the therapist, you at least got a feel for maybe their perspective of what you could work on or like how you
Sure.
could approach this. And so sometimes it's just a matter of like looking for someone who specializes in that. In most instances, I do believe this to be true. I think in most instances, you can walk away with something. Maybe that's just a diagnosis. Maybe that's just a little bit of psychoeducation about a particular topic that you then will take elsewhere to learn more
Sure.
about. But I'm just thinking about, like, maybe you learn you have ADHD, right? You can look for a therapist who specializes in working with clients with ADHD. Like, they may
Okay.
be a little more knowledgeable about how to work with you, have a few more tactics and tricks that or more effective with your particular challenge.
Yeah.
So I would say in deciding to walk away, look for something like a little more specific to what
Uh-huh.
it is that you're needing.
Yeah.
Yeah, walk away with something though.
And I think too, you can walk away with like a, I didn't like this style. I want somebody who's going to challenge me a little bit more. I want somebody who's going to, and you can share that too as you're looking for more therapists of kind of like, I recognize that this is what I'm looking for. And I think in addition to that, you know, a lot of times I think that people feel guilt or they feel bad, but just like we were talking about of like we're trained in this, you can just tell your therapist, you can say, listen, I really appreciate the time. I appreciate being able to meet or getting this journey started. I think I'm looking for something different, or I'm just looking for something that better fits my needs. Most therapists will and should understand that, be supportive of that, and they might even help you. Like they might have some
Yeah.
resources and some referrals for you to be able to say, try this so that you're not just then back to square one on your own trying to find somebody again.
100%. I love that because I've done that before. I'm like, okay, how can we like kind of better narrow down your search, right?
Yeah.
And, the other thing to remember about therapists and, the way you approach it, we do have spaces to be able to process our reactions to things. Cause like we are still human and it is still a form of rejection, but our job is to take that into our supervision. So I
Mhm.
don't know if for anybody who's in therapy, how much your therapist may have talked about this, but a huge part of being an effective therapist is engaging in your own supervision. That means, you talk to another therapist who is maybe slightly more seasoned or maybe knows a particular modality very well. And you kind of talk through your reactions. So your therapist has a space to go and say, like, oh no, I think I messed up. This client, said that they want to leave. I'm not quite sure why. I thought we were building good rapport. Your therapist has a space for that. So you
Yeah.
don't have to take care of the therapist and what I committed to weekly sessions and they're going to be so disappointed in me. And maybe
Yeah.
that only comes up for some people. Some people are very easily
Yeah.
like, whatever.
Yeah.
But you don't have to worry about us. We have a space to work that out. Get what you need from the
Yes.
experience. For you, Kenzie, in terms, is that how you manage your reactions to like client feedback?
Totally. As you were saying that, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this exact same thing happened to me." Like,
Okay.
I was so nervous about working with people who are older than me because I was like, "Oh my gosh, what if they're gonna be like, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you're talking about." And one of the first weeks of coming in as a therapist, I got matched with somebody and they ultimately ended up saying like, "Listen, I think that I'm just looking for somebody who is older than me or, that is essentially not younger than me." And so that was such a like that was what I was so scared of. But then I went to supervision. I talked about it. I was like, this is what I was afraid of happening. And it was fine. I processed through it. And now it's not even something that I even consider or think about anymore. And it was so fair of that person to just kind of say, like, this is just my expectation. This is what I wanted. And I'm happy that they did. And I helped them find somebody that what they were looking for. Right. So, and I think it's just a good reminder for both therapists and for clients. Like, if the relationship doesn't work, there's nothing wrong with you. It's not like there are just so many people in
Yeah.
the world. We're not going to get along or be the perfect match for everybody every single time, but you will find that experience where you do feel valued and like you can feel safe and that you trust that relationship, they're out there. So even if you have that experience where you're like, I don't think that that was right, it doesn't mean that therapy's not right. It doesn't mean to just kind of
Right.
say therapy's not for me. Like there are definitely people out there that are going to be able to hear you and to understand.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I honestly don't know that there is the perfect therapist, but there can be a good fit for you for your
Yes.
life right now. I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer in like not every therapist is for everyone, you
Yep.
know. And sometimes you need a different type of therapist for a different point in your life. And
Yeah.
that's something that I can definitely attest to. Like I've seen I believe I said this to my husband about how I had a therapist at one point and I have a different therapist now. And I was honest about the fact that I don't know that I would have been ready for the therapist that have now if I hadn't have had my previous therapist. And so
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
sometimes you're in a different phase of life or you're tackling a different problem. And so a therapist can be a good fit for a time. And then
Yeah.
you hit a point where maybe you plateau a little bit or maybe
Yep.
you're looking for something different. And I think that's okay too. You know, to your point,
Yes.
that's not a testament of something being wrong with you, but it just means that maybe your need isn't being met anymore. And so you got to be willing to kind of change it up a little bit.
Yes.
But I have a question for you because of what you said about, you know, that the client saying that they wanted to deal with someone who was like a little bit older. I do find that it's different when they have feedback about like the work or something that could maybe
Sure.
be changed
Sure.
versus something
Sure.
that like you can't, you're just the age that you are. You know what I mean? Like when it's something that you can't necessarily change, maybe they just want a male therapist or they
Yeah.
just want, you know, someone in a particular category. How
Yeah.
do you handle that, you know, when it's maybe something that you can't control?
Think I'm curious around what if I would do something differently now. At the time, it was so new and I was like, "Oh my gosh, let me find somebody for you." Like, I just was nervous. I think I probably would have explored it with her a little bit more, like, what is it about having somebody older that maybe feels a little bit safer, that would feel a little bit better? Because I think that there's information in that too of kind of like,
Yeah,
I'm just not sure that you're gonna get it, or it just feels weird to talk to somebody that's younger than me or around the same age as me. It feels like I can't be as open and vulnerable as I want, or it feels like maybe you just won't get it. And so I think that there's opportunity to explore that a little bit. And that doesn't mean that that's going to change, right? You could just be like, no,
sure.
I do just want a male therapist, or I do just want somebody that's older, and that's completely fine. But I think that there's a little bit of room to explore that, just in the same way of if somebody said like, hey, I want you to challenge me a little bit more. I want you to, like, let me process through this a little bit more without jumping in as quickly or something like that. We would absolutely process that. And so I think that there's still room to process some of those things that you can't even change.
I really like that because I am probably more likely to just let it go when it's something that I, you know, can't
Yeah.
control. But I like the idea of even that we can talk about.
Yeah.
I think I find that this comes up. I think I mentioned in a previous episode that I've supervised clinicians before.
Yeah.
So this comes up a lot when I'm supervising clinicians who want to do couples therapy, but maybe they're not married themselves.
Yeah.
And that is a common question that clients have. I think
Uh-huh.
it's a fair thing to want to know about your therapist,
Uh-huh.
but it's not really something that they can change or should change, you know, and maybe they're in committed relationships, but they've just not been married with kids. And
Yeah.
when you have a couple, you know, coming to sit down and maybe they've been married for a decade and they have several children,
Yeah.
it can be really hard to put that trust in someone who maybe doesn't have that experience, right? And so I think that that's an area where clients have the right to say, I'm just more comfortable with someone who has had this experience.
Yeah.
I still think there are things that you can gain. Like I said, you can always walk away with something. There's something that you could potentially gain from therapy with someone who maybe doesn't meet that mold that you're
Yeah.
imagining. But
Yeah.
ultimately, as a therapist, I don't shy away from it. Like I am who
Yeah.
I am. I'm not who I'm not. So
Yeah.
I'm not interested in trying to change that for them, but
Yeah.
totally
Yeah.
like respect their decision if they're like,
Yes.
yeah, this just, you know, isn't a good fit. Now, one thing that I will say when you're asking yourself, like, is it a good fit or not? Ask yourself, like, are you growing? Are you
Yeah.
progressing?
Yeah.
Because, like, if the therapist should not be getting in the way of the work.
Yeah.
If you come to sit down in therapy and you're so worried about how they're gonna respond to something that you say, or you're trying to get at something and they keep shifting the conversation to something else, or
Sure.
if they're getting in the way of the work and you're not growing or progressing, it's probably time to move on.
Sure.
But if you're just uncomfortable, but you're still
Mhm.
growing, because like maybe they asked that question that you would prefer to avoid and they like kind of press on that topic that's a little bit sensitive,
Yeah.
then that might be an indication that there's some growth that's happening and you're uncomfortable, and that's okay. Doesn't necessarily mean you're unsafe or that it's the wrong fit. It
Mhm.
may just mean that growth is uncomfortable.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that just, to your point, it's kind of like, okay, well, how do I know the difference? What does that look like?
Yeah.
It's having those conversations. It's bringing that into the room and kind of saying, this is what I'm noticing. This is kind of what's coming up for me. And so working through that in real time too. And again, your therapist should be able to meet you there. And kind of related, but when people do say things along the lines of like, "Oh, well, I want my therapist to have this I want them to be married and have this experience so they know what it's like," or "I want, them to be a certain age because 'cause they've gone through enough life to know what this is like." Absolutely, completely fair to want to have kind of like that relatability or just want to know that as client, and also our job is not to relate to you completely, our job is to help you figure out what is going on in your life and help you kind of open those doors. And so I think that it is so natural to want to be able to relate to somebody that you're opening up to your therapist, to whoever. But we are not there to have shared experiences. We are there because we know how to be therapists. We know how to do our job to help you grow. And I think that that's also an important thing to remember.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I will sometimes use an analogy of like a doctor. You know, if you discover that you need back surgery, would you say, well, I'm only going to go to a doctor who's had back surgery? No, I wanna know how many back surgeries you've done, right? Like, I don't it'd be great if you had the experience and could kinda relate to what the recovery process is, but, it's more about your expertise and whether or not you actually can offer something that would be helpful to me, right? Not
Yes.
that you necessarily had that exact same experience.
Yes.
And so that's an important thing to remember because there's no therapist that's gonna share all of your experiences, and honestly, sometimes that can get in the way when there are
Yes.
too many similarities and shared
Yes.
experiences. It's almost like there's too much overlap.
Yeah.
And it can be hard for the therapist to kind of like back up enough to get that perspective, you know? So if your goal is to find someone whose like life is so similar to yours that they can just relate to everything, probably not realistic and not necessarily a guarantee that it's going to lead to
Yeah.
like the outcomes that you're looking for, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Something that I wanted to touch on because this is something that also doesn't get talked about a lot, but what if a therapist tells a client that they aren't the right fit? When
Mm.
Carly, when does that come up just so that people have a little bit of an understanding around that? Like when would a therapist tell a client?
Yeah, great question. That's a hard one for
Yeah.
me, but honestly, it typically comes up when I think a higher level of care is
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah.
Because, if I'm just feeling like we're not meshing well, but the client seems to be getting something out of it and they keep coming back and they're saying that things are good,
Yeah.
then maybe that's just my perspective. Maybe, I'm just but where this most often comes up for me is when I'm like, okay, based on maybe the level of risk or maybe
Yep.
based on the diagnosis, I'm not equipped to offer them the help that they need. Maybe they
Yes.
need more frequent sessions. Maybe they need, right now, I'm mostly virtual. Maybe I really think they need in person. Maybe they need like an intensive outpatient program of some
Yep.
sort, maybe because of suicidal ideation or their level of self harm or things of that nature.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we have to have that tough conversation to say, listen, I hear you on, you're enjoying this and you feel like you're getting something out of it. But ethically, I can't
Yes.
continue to see you knowing that I can't adequately support you in the way that
Right.
you need. It's a
Right.
very difficult conversation to
Yeah.
have with a client. And
Yeah.
Personally, I've not been on the receiving end of that as a
Sure.
client just
Sure.
yet, but I have to imagine that it's
Yeah.
tough, and so I try to approach it with empathy. I try to
Yeah.
approach it with, like, I'd like to support you in finding who that new person is so that I'm
Yeah.
not reinforcing any, like, abandonment and things like
Sure.
that. But
Yeah.
it is a tough but very real part of doing this work, you know?
Yeah.
What about for you?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we noted it because I think that it is an experience that's kind of like, again, jarring. And so to just kind of give that background on it of it happens because therapists care. Because if it
Yeah.
gets to the point of feeling like what we are doing isn't enough right now, maybe there's something more that's needed, that's when that will come up. Um, and if we feel like the work in therapy has stalled or something feels off, like I think that we might bring that up into sessions and just kind of say like, hey, what's going on? What are our goals? Let's circle back to these sort of things. That wouldn't necessarily be a reason that a therapist would end the therapeutic relationship. That would just be kind of again a conversation that you have about what's happening in the room. But if there is kind of that higher level of care that's needed, and you're right, it's hard. It's hard to kind of get to that point. You've formed this relationship and you care about this person and you want to be able to help, but sometimes that help just comes with needing extra support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In terms of like takeaways for this particular listener, I know we covered
Yes.
a few things. Any final thoughts or recommendations for them finding the right fit of therapist?
Yeah, I think it was just such a great question to ask. I really appreciate it. I think it's so good for so many people to hear. And I think that hopefully this person has continued their therapy journey, has found somebody that they really connect with, feel like a positive therapeutic relationship. If not, I would suggest kind of taking some of the things that we talked about into their next experience and hopefully giving it another shot and seeing what comes up for them. And for anybody that's had this experience and maybe just kind of feels like, that was hard or therapy isn't for me, like giving yourself another shot and seeing what could come of it, I just think is important.
Agreed 100% with that. Like, give it another shot,
Yeah.
similar to dating. You don't go on one date and say, like, oh, relationships aren't for me.
Yes. 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 Yes.
So, give it another shot, try with someone else, talk about what didn't work well in the past
Mhm.
experience so that at
Yeah.
least your therapist maybe has that framework and is able to be mindful of those things. And yeah, and regardless, leave with something. If you're like, listen, we're not a great fit. At least I got some coping skills for my anxiety, or at least I walked away with like these questions that I can ask myself and reflect on,
Yeah.
or I implemented this new practice, of journaling or a mindfulness practice that I
Yeah.
can use. Still look for what you can take
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Best of luck to this person. I don't know what state you're in, but we'd love for you to reach out and
Yeah.
potentially even if we're not the right person to point you in the right direction would be great.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, we will see you guys next week for another episode.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. That's it for today's episode. We hope it gave you something to reflect on, or maybe even that aha moment.
If so, you know the drill. Rate, review, subscribe, and don't forget to text it to the group chat. Remember, sharing is caring.
Got a question you want us to tackle? Big or small, we want to hear it.
Email us or slide into our DMs on Instagram at askatherapist_pod.
You bring the questions.
We'll bring the insight and probably a metaphor or two.
This is Ask a Therapist.
See you next time.